When you're working on complex projects with Goose, you'll often need to break work into multiple tasks, but wouldn't it be nice to do some of these tasks at the same time? Goose gives you two powerful ways to do this: subagents and subrecipes. In this video, I'm going to explain what each approach does, compare what they're good at, and help you understand when to use each one. Goose gives you these two ways to delegate tasks. Both subagents and subrecipes can run multiple AI instances in parallel or in sequence, but they work a little bit differently behind the scenes. So let's break down what each one does and when you want to use each one. Subagents are temporary AI instances that you create with natural language. They handle specific tasks and then disappear. You get real-time progress tracking, no setup, no configuration files, just natural language instructions. Let's look at what subagents are good at. Quick setup in the prompt with everyday language, and you have process isolation so failures don't affect your main workflow. You have context preservation to keep your chat clean, and based on how you word the prompt, you have very flexible parallel or sequential execution. But subagents have some limitations. Since each subagent is created as it's needed, they have limited reusability because they're discarded when they're done. There are some tool restrictions for security. For example, the subagents cannot enable additional extensions that the main process didn't already have access to. Likewise, each subagent will use the same provider and model as the main process that launched them. Also, subagents can't recursively keep spawning additional subagents. Now let's look at subrecipes. Recipe files can be written in YAML or JSON, but subrecipes can only be written in YAML. You get high reusability since they're saved files, structured parameters and data types with validation, template support for dynamic values in the recipe, plus each subrecipe has access to enable any additional extensions that you have installed on your system, and each subrecipe can also choose a different provider and model than the main parent recipe that launched them. Whether they run in parallel or in sequence will depend on the prompt and instructions that the parent recipe had to begin with. But subrecipes also have some trade-offs. There's some initial setup complexity since you have to write the recipes into a set of files, and there's a bit of learning curve for the recipe syntax. And just like subagents, subrecipes cannot launch additional subrecipes. Now let's take a look at what kind of tasks each approach excels at. Subagents are perfect for independent operations like creating multiple files, basic data processing, file transformations, and exploring some analysis work without cluttering up your main chat. Subagents are also great for process isolation. For example, tasks that might fail without affecting your main workflow, or operations requiring different configurations and experimental or proof-of-concept work. Subrecipes excel at structured workflows like multi-step processes, code review pipelines that go from security to quality to documentation, or even some project setup automation, or something fun like travel planning that depends on specific conditions. But here's where it gets really interesting. You don't have to choose just one approach. You can actually use both together. You can start with subrecipes for your structured workflow foundation and then add subagents for dynamic, context-dependent tasks. For example, your subrecipe might detect what type of project you're working on and then spawn subagents to handle specific customizations based on what it finds. This gives you structure plus flexibility. Here's a decision framework. You'll want to use subagents when you need quick, one-off task delegation where the process isolation is really important, or when you're working with external AI tools or experimenting with approaches, or the tasks can be done completely independent. On the other side, you'll want to use subrecipes when you're building reusable workflows, where you need structured parameter handling, or when you're creating complex multi-step processes for automation. You can store these recipes in version control and share them with your team. You can even consider using both together when you want structured workflow foundations of subrecipes plus dynamic task handling. This will give you the most flexibility in complex projects when you're building systems that need both repeatability and adaptability. Here's another important restriction. Whatever kind of work you want to do, both approaches of subrecipes and subagents limit you to a total of 10 concurrent parallel workers. And you'll need to define that parallel or sequential operation within your prompt with subagents Or if you're using subrecipes, the parent recipe will need to define that parallel or sequential workflow in the instructions if you're in interactive mode like the UI, or in the prompt if you're running in headless mode. So here's my practical recommendation. You want to start with subagents to experiment and understand what your workflow needs and then refine the idea. Subagents are easier to get started with because you don't have to write big recipes first. Once you identify the patterns that you want to repeat, you can convert those workflows to subrecipes. Both features are still pretty new in Goose, so expect some evolution in how they work as they mature. But they're already powerful enough for production use when you understand their strengths and limitations. We're always happy to take your feedback in the development process to make these features great, so let us know how you want to use them. Drop us a message in our Discord community or in a GitHub issue if you have some feedback on how you'd like to use these. And there you have it. Subagents for quick delegation and experimentation, subrecipes for structured reusable workflows, or maybe both together for maximum flexibility. The choice depends on your specific needs and workflow requirements. Check the links in the description for our documentation. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.